Welcome to Decent Christian Music Talk. I'm Eric McClanahan. My co-host for the series had been Kylan Savage. He had to step away tonight, so my buddy AJ Simmons is joining me tonight. Thanks, AJ, for stepping on last minute.
Of course.
Yeah, how you doing?
All right, man.
All
So
right.
talk some music.
Yeah. And then also joining me is Tim Whitaker, who is the creator of the new Evangelicals.
Hmm, that's
How you
me.
doing, Tim?
I'm great. I'm excited to be talking about things that I don't always talk about during my day job. So,
Right, right. Um, First, though, I do want to ask you about the new evangelicals and kind of what the purpose is there and your mission or however you classify it.
yeah, we're trying to institute Marxism into the church. That's what we're trying to do and trying to destroy everything. No, I'm just kidding. That's a complete joke. I'm not trying to do that. I'm not even a Marxist, okay? Never even read Marx. I was homeschooled, so it didn't come up. Um, anyway, yeah, essentially our organization does three major things. We hold space for folks who have been hurt or marginalized by the evangelical church. We advocate for accountability inside of evangelical spaces, and we help people explore the Christian tradition kind of beyond their tradition of origin, I guess we could say, which usually in my case, in the case of folks who work with us, tends to be evangelicalism, conservative Christianity, things like that. So that's what we do. We're a digital first organization. We're a nonprofit. And most of my day is spent either making content, retweeting or tweeting back at Theo Bros or Bro Evangelicals and podcasting. So that's what I do most of my day. And then I try and fundraise and, do all the board stuff by night.
Nice. And I just learned today that you also are a drummer. I didn't realize, like, I found your Instagram that's all about drumming, and I somehow had missed that part of your life. So, how long have you been playing drums? What, bands
Oh,
are you in
yeah.
or
I
have
mean,
you been in?
I'm still a professional drummer to this day. I play every weekend in a professional cover band. I play top
Nice.
40 music now. We're on loop, click, in ears, the whole nine. But yeah, I've been drumming since I was 11, and I've been in the church playing drums up until 3 years ago. So it was a very recent phenomenon. Most of my identity up until TNE really was being a drummer, like being a very serious drummer who, put the work in and was really deep in that world. I mean, I'm not going to say I was the best drummer ever, but I could easily hold my own, in like the typical rock sense, no problem. So yeah, so I mean that's a huge part of my life. Not so much these days, I kind of lost that identity of like needing to be the best drummer ever to feel like I have something to prove to the world. And now I do it more as a way to relax from, what I do during the day. But yeah, yeah, I've been a drummer for a long time. In fact, I was just in a Christianity Today article. They interviewed me about worship drumming. I was
Oh, wow.
quoted in that one recently. So it just kind of
Nice.
worked out in a weird way. I was like, yeah, I would love to talk about worship drumming. That's a huge part of my life that again just doesn't really come up super often now.
Right. Well, that's pretty cool.
Mhm.
And so when did the new evangelicals start?
I started it on Instagram
Okay.
December of 2020. Just started
Nice.
asking questions. Mainly, my biggest concerns at the time were like, hey, I'm not understanding this like Trump fanaticism. I'm not understanding some of the response I'm seeing by Christians to like George Floyd and then the COVID response. People like Sean Foyt at the time, I was watching them and I was like, I don't get it. I'm also a worship guy, Sean. I don't think that touring the world, or the US in the middle of a pandemic is like the wisest decision. So all of those things kind of cropped up, and I was like, well, is anyone else asking these questions? So I thought of the name, the new Evangelicals. I got the name on Instagram and everywhere else, and then I just started asking, and that's when I discovered the whole world of deconstruction, the ex-evangelical movement. So it's not like and by the way, I should say, I was still serving in my church when all this was happening. I was still very much committed to being in an evangelical space. I loved it. And then, long story short, my church kind of gave me an ultimatum that April to either stop serving with them as a volunteer drummer or stop what I was doing online. So I resigned from that role, left that church, and just kept on going with TNE. And now I do it full time for a living.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Is it okay if I ask what denomination church it was that you were in?
Yeah, totally. It was this, at that time, it was Assemblies of God, but I grew up
Okay.
initially in a very John MacArthur piano and hymns only church. And I've been around, I've been part of the CMA, Christian Missionary Alliance. I've been part of the missional movement. I've been around the block.
All right. Uh, I can relate with that. The church I grew up in believed that any music with drums or electric guitars was like the devil's music. So my rebellion was listening to CCM. There's a lot of people that was, that
For
was
him, so edgy.
that was the first one that I fell in love with. I was like,
Same,
this
same.
really? It's
Yeah,
like, listen to those guitars on For Future Generations. It
dude,
sounded so heavy to me
totally.
at the time.
How about Obvious? That song was banging.
Yeah.
I'm like, whoa,
Yep.
Obvious. Whoa, this is deep. And then you know what happened after all that happened, and then DC Talk split, and Toby Mac releases his like first EP, even before Extreme Days. It was like the rough cut of Extreme Days was on there. I was like, whoa, this is too intense. Like, I don't know, Toby. This feels
Yeah.
too worldly for me. And that was just kind of the gateway drug to all the heavier stuff. And then I had a mohawk and was trying to play like Travis Barker, and the rest is history.
That's right. AJ, remind me, what was your upbringing like music wise?
I mean, so I grew up in various like mainline tradition churches, like depending on like the closest one to whatever rural community we were living in. And so like to kind of connect to like Leah Payne's book, like we got Bon Jovi and Petra in our household.
Nice.
Like it was just kind of one of many things. Like, yeah, the rotation in there would have, especially
Yeah.
midnight, like Jars of Clay, and DC Talk. My parents had like Amy Grant and Michael W. Smith and Petra and Striper. And I think I forgot Striper one time when you and I were talking, and one of my parents was like, "Hey, you forgot the cool band of Striper." But then we also, like I said, had mainstream music and stuff like that. It's like that's one of the things that's kind of been neat seeing this tournament, some of the conversations that folks have. They're like really intensely like, I love this because this is all I got. This was like the edgy thing I got was being able to listen to this music. And I was like, it's kind of just part of the mini collection of the things that I got to listen to. So like that's been a kind of an interesting thing to see over like the last year since the last like the first tournament, I guess.
Right.
But yeah, like CCM was in the household, but it was not like the only thing that we
Gotcha.
listened to.
Oh
Gotcha.
man, I had to sneak my first Yellow Card album into my house. I went to my little CD shop. I'm like, ooh, this is not a Christian album. Good album though, for the record. Ocean
Like
Avenue.
sneaking
Yes.
into the CD warehouse like
I
this.
really was. I really was. Like, it's like I was smuggling drugs or something. Like, hey Tim, how was school? It's fine. Everything's fine. No problems. I'm going right to my room to do homework. Yep, homework time.
It's
Oh,
funny.
the only band I
So,
had to sneak in my house was Smashing Pumpkins. For whatever reason, like my mom was just like dead set against the Pumpkins.
That's funny.
Yeah, so it's just funny.
maybe she just didn't like Billy Corgan's voice.
Yeah, but it's kind of like my wife's take on it
All
too.
right.
Yeah, I'm not a fan.
Yeah. So which
But also as a drummer, I just find their music boring. Like one
Interesting.
of the problems being a drummer, at least my style of drumming, which was really influenced by Travis Barker, which got me into funk and like really fast and aggressive beats, is that like 90s grunge. I'm like, yeah, it's cool, but meh. Give me Snarky Puppy, give me Dirty Loops, Animals as lead. Like Protest the Hero, Under Oath. I want
Protest the Hero.
aggressive, fast, heavy, or like real funk, like just deep, deep pocket.
All right.
So yeah, that's just me.
Well, spoiler alert, AJ and I counted down our top 10 albums of the 90s, and both of us had Smashing Pumpkins albums in there. So
different Smashing Pumpkins albums, but yeah, Smashing Pumpkins.
Yeah,
It's a
different
different
Smashing
album.
Pumpkins. Yep. But I totally get it. Like some of my coworkers, I put Smashing Pumpkins on, they're like, "Oh, turn that off." But anyways, so Tim, how did you get? I guess did you start listening to For Him and things like out of rebellion, or
No,
how
no.
did you discover like the CCM world?
So the quick story is this: my really conservative piano only, hymns only church got a new radical pastor in who was like, hey, we can sing some modern praise choruses with a guitar, like shout to the Lord or Lord, I lift your name on high, things like that. So my dad, who is a guitarist and bass player, he kind of went from like the rocker lifestyle to the fundamentalist lifestyle. He's like, this is great. So then they wanted to get drums in the church, but they were concerned about, losing half the church because drums were the real sign of a worldly and demonic spirit, clearly. So my
Absolutely.
dad goes, well, what if we had my 11-year-old son hop on the drums? Who's going to get mad at an 11-year-old? Like, he's 11. So that's how I got involved playing in the church. My dad bought my first drum set. It was some no-name drum set where on the bass drum head, the word radical was emblazoned on it. So my dad got duct tape and crossed it out so he didn't offend anyone at church. And then we started just playing more, very Darlene Zschech, Every Day, My Redeemer Lives, songs like that. Eventually there was like a youth group band that kind of formed. So it was kind of pretty natural progression. My mom liked Point of Grace. I was a boy, so I liked For Him. That was like the big war. Then you discover Avalon and Twilight Paris. Man, these are some names I haven't thought about in a while. And I got, and then DC Talk, right? And then from there, you just kind of progress into Reliant K, Supertones, right? And my mom was like, hey, these are Christian bands, they're not cursing. Fantastic. So it just was kind of one thing led to another. That got me into eventually POD and Blindside, and then the rest is history.
I was going to ask, so I know you like a lot of the metalcore, like Under Oath, Silent Planet kind of stuff. Was there any was that just a natural progression too, or do you remember like hearing something with screaming that kind of made you like, okay, this is my jam?
I have a confession about Silent Planet.
Okay.
The old bass player follows me on Instagram, and he DM'd me a year ago, or no, 2 years ago. I was like, hey, love your stuff. I'm like, hey, I know of your band. And he goes, hey, I'll be in Delaware. Come out to a show. So I met him and he gave me a shirt. That's about as far as I go with Silent Planet. Like, I don't listen to their music at all. I just wear their shirt in videos a lot because I love the shirt, and I know it's a pretty underground band. And people will oftentimes comment, what's your favorite Silent Planet song? And I'm like, I don't know. I just don't know. I don't listen to them a whole lot. So for me, though, Under Oath was the gateway drug. Okay, so I went to my mall's Christian bookshop, and there was and at this point, there's no Napster's like just coming out. Wow, I sound so old, Jesus. Okay, yeah, so Napster's just not. It's just in the origins. Dial-up internet's still a thing, and so you actually buy CDs. So I go to this shop, I see the woman with like the oxygen mask on, and I'm like, oh, who is this? And I just buy the CD. And me and my friend put it in his car. He's 17. And the first song comes on, Young and Aspiring. And I'm like, whoa, I hate it. This is way too heavy. But Reinventing Your Exit was really melodic and very much like I loved that. So I could tolerate the screaming there. And so, they were kind of incrementalism, right? Of like, okay, how about, some will seek forgiveness, others escape. I can get down with that, So like all of those songs eventually got me into some of their music. And then eventually when I heard Define the Great Line, I was like, no way. This is just too hard. It's a deeper scream. I don't like it. And then it grew on me. And honestly, the rest is history. But I will say I was pretty wide in my musical taste. Like, it wasn't only heavy stuff. And secretly, my cousin, who was a bad influence on me, we're actually very close now. He was not raised in a Christian home at all. So he's giving me bands like Static X or Mudvayne. And I'm like, this is awesome. Like, Dig has like 35 F-bombs in it, like the first two stanzas, but it's so aggressive, and like songs like Death Bloom. So I was listening to other stuff like on my first gen iPod that my parents had no clue about. So it was wider than just, Emery or Under Oath, but a lot of that music really shaped me as a musician. I loved it as a drummer. And of course, discovering Blink-182, Travis Barker, etc.
Nice. So the Silent Planet thing's hilarious to me because I saw you wearing that shirt on Ruslan's interview, and I was like, well, the thought that you would wear that on like a 5-hour long interview of a band you don't even like.
No. It's not that I don't like them. I just don't listen to them. Like they're cool.
Right.
I have like 5 shirts. I have like all black shirts in that one. And because I'm a very simple person when it comes to style, like this shirt I was given by Memes for Jesus for free. That's why I'm wearing it. Okay, I'm not wearing it because I think it's cool. I just like the guy, so I support him. But right. Yes, by the way, that Ruslan interview, 4 hours deep, that boy brought me into. I could not believe it.
I don't think I've finished it yet. It's on my watch later playlist, and I'll just get it.
You don't need to. I was like, dude, I'm 4 hours in, and now you want to talk about the trans community, my head is fried. Like I'm done. I tap, he's funny.
I appreciate that you'll talk, openly with people who are maybe still more typical evangelicals. And you were just at Preston Sprinkle's event. I think he's
Yeah.
probably still considers himself evangelical, I would
Yeah.
think.
Yeah.
Because I'm trying with the whole what I do. I don't want it to be like categorized as, conservative or progressive or any of these other things. I want to like give a voice to everybody.
Mm.
So do you get, like, last week I had Kyle from the Babylon Bee on. The week before I had Mason Meninga on.
Oh, I
So it's
love
like,
Mason.
yeah. So like I'm trying to um give everybody a voice for music and kind of what it's been to them. So do you ever get any like pushback on the people who you um are willing to dialogue about openly and things?
No, because I positioned myself as someone who was willing to have the conversations with folks that maybe those conversations or at least understanding needs to happen, where people in my community don't feel safe talking to them. I've met Charlie Kirk. I've been to Turning Point USA events. I know a lot of those dudes behind the scenes. I will get dinner with them to try and have the conversation, and I will go to their events to cover them, to say to people, in my space, hey, look, I'm not exaggerating when I tell you this. Here's the receipt. I was there. So that's just kind of like part of my work. Now,
Right.
it's different in a lot of cases. Like Ruslan, for example, he's what I would call as a good faith person, meaning him and I probably talk on text maybe twice a week about all kinds of things. So I love being challenged. I love debating this stuff in a lot of ways. Of course, when it comes to human rights issues and the rights of people to live in America, that's kind of different. I draw a harder line there. But when it comes to like theology and how do we navigate these things, I'm pretty pragmatic. And so I'm kind of in the headspace of whoever I can work with to lower the temperature that is of rhetoric and vitriol that's aimed at people that I deeply care about, people in the
Mm.
queer community and the BIPOC community, I want to do while also being very public about what we're advocating for as an organization. So it's kind of a both and approach, not really
Okay.
either or. And that's kind of how it works for me.
All right. That makes sense. AJ, did you have any questions before we move on to the tournament?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right. So we were in the Elite Eight last week, and I guess we'll just let me know if anything was surprising to you all. Rich Mullins beat Amy Grant 63-37. Um, DC Talk barely beat Jars of Clay by 9 votes. What did you all see that Jars of Clay pulling up an upset there, or you not surprised that DC Talk won?
I've been talking a lot, AJ. You have any thoughts here?
Jars were robbed. No, no, I love both of these bands. When we talk 90s music, I have an album from each of them in my top 10 90s albums. But I had Jars going through, like, I had two different brackets. One was just like my picks and ones that I thought would win, and I had Jars coming out of this bracket. I think I underestimated the absolute grip that Jesus Freak might have on some folks, in particular from DC Talk. But no, just it's nuts that it came down to 9 votes. But it was also one of those things like, oh man, maybe one more like funny tweet from me could have maybe got some folks to jump in there. And I know some folks that would have voted for Joseph Clay that just don't have Twitter.
Right.
And I was like, come on, sign back up. Like, I know you, yeah, I get it. I understand your position. You got off Twitter, but just jump back in just so you can vote on this one. So that one was, I guess it's slightly disappointing. I mean, it's hard to be disappointed. And again, I have albums from both of them in my top 10. It's just like Jars had what, like 12 albums, 11 albums or something like that. And DC
like
Talk
that.
had like 5. And you're like,
Yeah.
and start talking about like longevity and like impact. I think over a longer period of time, though, I think DC Talk had a huge impact in the 90s. Obviously, Toby Mac, which we'll talk about too. So I think like that one was difficult because like I thought Jars would have like squeaked it. I thought this would be close, but I thought it would go to Jars
Right.
on that one. So that was, I mean, disappointing, but like not devastatingly disappointing to me.
Right.
Though it is fitting that I'm in here like instead of Kylan defending Jars, considering like his less of an enthusiastic take on Jars of Clay. So,
That
but we
comes
can
up
take.
almost every episode.
I know, because it's like, I mean, it's like a 3.5 hour, talking about a 4 hour interview, a 3.5 hour just absolute trouncing of Jars on Church Jams.
Yeah.
And there's stuff that I'm like, I've listened to this album, since it came out. Like, I remember hearing Flood for the first time, and like points they're making, I'm like, that never registered with me, nor as like a problem or a thing. And they're seeing things as like a downside. They're like, yeah, this sounds like an album like around a campfire. I'm like, yeah, it sounds like an album done around a campfire. I'm like, why is that a bad thing?
Yeah.
But they for like 3.5 hours just punch at it.
Yeah, it was rough.
Yeah, it was rough. I mean, I admire the braveness there of going
Oh yeah,
after
absolutely.
after that. But yeah, that one, like I said, I thought it'd be close, but I thought Jars were gonna squeak it out, but I was wrong.
Tim, do you have any thoughts on that one?
I mean, I'm definitely a biased DC Talk hardcore fanboy.
Okay.
I only know a few songs from Jars of Clay. So I fully admit I'm biased. I'm honestly though surprised that it wasn't by more votes. I mean, to me, it's DC Talk and Newsboys. They're like the two groups that I think should be head to head, both in terms of discography and also in how they changed the CCM music industry forever. I mean, you think about DC Talk's first album to where they ended up.
Yeah.
It's a whole different like universe of music, right? Like
Hmm.
they also pioneered like, I mean, Colored People. Come on, you were talking about like songs that are doing things in white evangelical spaces that other groups just couldn't do or weren't able to do. So I think that there's a lot that DC Talk did for the genre of CCM, if you can call it that. Plus, I think a lot of people, I mean, their first album was like 19, I think 89, 88. And Jars of
Hmm.
Clay, their first album was 1995, according to Wikipedia. So there's a pretty big gap here. There's like a 7-year difference. And for me, those albums just from what I know compared to Jars of Clay, I just think DC Talk is like probably they might be the GOAT Christian group of all time, period. In terms of reach, music, talent, just influence, but that I could be a little extreme or biased by saying that.
Well, I feel like a lot of people felt like with 5 Iron Frenzy not being in it this year that this might be DC Talk's year. So it's gonna be interesting. I think
Did 5 Iron Frenzy win last year?
they won last year, so I left
Hmm.
them out this year just to not have just a total repeat of the previous year. Um,
Yeah. I think I'm actually full transparency a little behind on this current CCM tournament. I didn't know that you were doing this, and usually I see your stuff. So I'm looking through it like now at all the different names that you have on here, and
right.
there's so many. But yeah, I mean, I just don't know. Well, I mean, votes are votes, but in my mind, it's like, guys, like, without DC Talk, a lot of these bands aren't happening. Like these other bands don't exist without DC Talk doing and paving the way for this world to be put on the map and like hit the charts and win Grammys, etc.
True. What about AJ? Did you have any thoughts on Rich Mullins and Amy Grant?
I mean, I had both in my pick one and my expectation one that Rich would go in, simply because I mean, over the past year I've kind of seen the folks that tend to vote on this, I think, are more in that really pro Rich Mullins camp that might be a little bit more niche, I think. So I think he might be a performer that benefited from the selectorate here, to use that language. I mean, because I maybe I'm wrong, and you know this stuff much better than me, Erica. I think Amy probably sold more records than Rich in her career,
Easily.
by a lot, would be my guess. But and so I think that he benefited just from who's in the population. But I did have him winning this, both, like I said, the one I preferred and what I thought would happen. But I did think it would be closer. So I think the surprise here is the trouncing.
Right.
I think when
Uh,
you double up, 2-1 almost On the Amy Grant, like, that's impressive.
And that's not with people just commenting Amy Grant's name to try to vote for her, like how happened last year. Tim, I don't
Which
know
is
if
like the
you.
funnest like in joke on this. Like
Yeah,
it is one of the funnier that and like travesty.
yeah.
I think are two of the funniest in jokes about this tournament. But yeah, I don't
Tim, I
think there
don't know
was.
if you're. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you,
Oh, you
AJ.
you go ahead. You go ahead, Eric.
I don't know if you're aware of last year. Apparently, Amy Grant, her poll got posted in a Facebook group, and all these people came to Twitter and didn't know how to actually vote in the poll. So I'm just getting floods of comments of Amy Grant's name.
Oh,
So
boomers. That's adorable.
so
Yeah.
now there are people who comment Amy Grant on any random tweet having to do with
That's
Christian
so
music. So if you ever
funny.
get those, that's why.
I'm gonna start doing that now.
Yeah, there's several people who do, and it doesn't get old.
That's good. That's
Yeah.
good.
Do you have any preference between Rich Mullins and Amy Grant?
Well, maybe what I'm going to say here represents people that fall through the cracks here. You know, whenever these votes come up, there are definitely bands where I'm like, I don't really listen to either, but one has a better name in my head, so I vote for that person. And
Gotcha.
that's Rich Mullins to me. I'm like, okay, I know a few of his songs, but he's kind of like, the ragamuffin gospel kind of vibe. He's
Yeah.
like the dude who was like, why, what did he say about highlighters? So we can kind of highlight certain words that we want and don't want to have like in the
Right.
Bible. I'm like, I love that guy. Vote. So, I think that some people have that position of some of these bands where it's like, I've heard of these names and this one I think is cooler or better, or the person behind it's better. So vote. So that's kind of my take on this.
Makes sense. Switchfoot demolished POD 74-26.
I'm
Tim, I
not
can see
surprised.
you. Yeah.
Not surprised. I'm a huge POD fan. Okay, one of my first ever real heavy Christian rock shows was POD and Blindside. All right, I mean classic. So, and I was a huge Satellite fan. POD's discography is really checkered. I mean, their newest album, I'm not sure if it's out yet in full, but I like demoed the songs that were kind of released early on
Uh-huh.
like iTunes. I was not impressed. I was like, bro, there was a few things that were okay, but I'm surprised POD made it this far over Under Oath. Like that
Mhm.
shocks me. That is the upset here in my mind. Again, no shade to POD. I'm a huge fan. Like I really love their stuff. Southtown is key. That whole album is so good.
Mhm.
But I mean, POD is they're not really around. Under Oath just announced they're only chasing safety 20-year tour where they're
Mhm.
doing the full album plus each city votes for their own custom set list. I mean,
Awesome.
that band is releasing bangers still. Like their newest album is great.
Mhm.
So I think I'm more angry about that. And yes, POD deserves to get demolished against Switchfoot. No doubt about it.
All right, AJ, what do you think there?
So and again, I'm terrible about this stuff, but is I wasn't surprised about POD beating Under Oath because of where I grew up. POD was much more popular than
Mm.
Under Oath and much more mainstream
Mm.
to the point that a friend of mine that is like, I text Eric about this, is not even in this community, like singing Alive by them when we were playing Call of Duty the other night. So it's like singing part of it because I asked if he was still alive or something like that. And he started singing, and this was actually connected to a conversation I had with my wife because she's like, I didn't know POD growing up. I was like, what do you mean? Like, I'm not wrong here. I checked with my friends, like, they were fairly popular in our school, right? And not only amongst like the youth group kids. They had
Yeah.
very crossover appeal, I think, because of like
Yep.
that rap rock combination kind of worked where I grew up. And so that's why I wasn't surprised here is that, and maybe that was in the time again, I don't know these things. You can tell me like Under Oath, what do you mean? Sold, millions more albums than POD. Maybe that's right. I don't know.
No.
But because of where I grew up, I wasn't too shocked by that, nor particularly too upset by it. It's one of those things of like I didn't really care either way on this one. Um, I cared more about Under Oath, some of their earlier round matchups, and I went all in on Under Oath in some of their earlier round matchups simply because it was their opponents there, in my
Yes, amen,
preferences there.
amen.
Um,
Bravo,
and
bravo.
so like I actually went and learned some Under Oath song titles just so I could make a funny post about like the importance of Under Oath like winning. But once they hit POD, I was like, yeah, it's POD. I'm sorry. Like there's not even I'm not again, I not only that POD won, but I wasn't shocked that it was a blowout on that. And
Well,
so then once POD got the Switchfoot, but I also kind of carried that forward. I was like, okay, in my mind, Switchfoot is bigger than POD and a more crossover appeal. So I'm not surprised that they performed better than POD.
yeah, you make a good point, especially with Satellite. That album crossed. I mean, Alive was on TRL, Total
Yep.
Request Live, like that album. And by the way, that album has banger after banger. I mean, there's
Yep.
not a bad song on that album. I mean, you got Boom, you got Satellite, Messenger. I mean, there's a lot of songs there. And the mix, I'm not a producer, but I've recorded a lot of music. It's a very unique mix. It has a very like metallic. It's just a very unique feel. The whole album is just it has this vibe to it that works, right? So I think you're right. That album was a boulder in the lake, so to speak. It made huge waves and it did cross over. And their lyrics were not explicitly Christian, but also were very much spiritual to like even like a lay audience, right? So that part totally tracks. And I think you're right. I think from my vantage point in the scene I was a part of, they were both great, but then Under Oath just kind of took over once the Find the Great line happened, right? And even Lost in the Sound of Separation. That's to me is Under Oath's most underrated album. That's a good album through and through. And also they've continued on their legacy. Like they're still writing new music. They kind of had their deconstruction phase. They wrote songs about that. They said the F word for the first time, right? So like I think that for me, Under Oath has a lot more appeal now. But I totally get what you're saying in the sense of as far as who's big and like who's more recognizable, it's definitely POD.
I
Yeah.
love that
And
you. Sorry, AJ.
no, no, go ahead, Eric. Go.
So I love that you mentioned the Messenger because that is my favorite song on the album, and nobody ever hardly mentions that one. So
The
I kind of
drum
got
solo,
excited about
bro. The
that. Yeah,
drum
it's so
solo.
good.
So good. It's
Yeah.
it's a great song. It's killer. I'll still throw it on and be like, this stuff, yeah, I'm with
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. What were you gonna say, AJ? Sorry to cut you off
Oh, I was
again.
gonna say, I think that Switchfoot for me personally had a tougher route to get where they got. Like
Mm.
to take out Lifehouse, who again has, I think, really strong crossover appeal to a much wider audience, to the point that genuinely, when you had that vote of like, is Lifehouse Christian? I was like, they are? Like what? Like I didn't know. I honestly I didn't.
Right.
Um, but once they went up against Me Without You, like okay, that was actually difficult for me.
Right.
Because like we talked before, like Me Without You, Copeland, like the weird
Mhm.
like indie
Yeah,
2000s like that was my jam.
Right.
totally.
And so then they have to go up against Reliant K, which again it's like like that's a tough one. If that could have been the final, like that would have been a fair final, I
Right.
think, right? Or at least for that
Yeah.
decade, whatever you want term you want to use there. And so like I feel like Switchfoot had, for me personally at least, harder matchups to get where they were getting.
Let's
I agree.
see. Yeah, I would agree. I mean, let's see. Under Oath had, yeah, yeah, you're right. I mean, Reliant K is another heavy hitter. Um, Looks like it was switched for Amberlin. That's also a good matchup too, because Amberlin has a pretty
Yeah,
good.
yes. Yeah, I forgot about that one, and I
They have
have to
a
actually acknowledge that. I was
Mm.
texting with my
yeah.
dad before he jumped on here, and Amberlin is one of his favorite bands. He's like, make sure to note that like the 2000s was like like the 80s and 2000s was my dad. His music, like the weird U shape. But yes, the
Yeah.
Amberlin matchup is another tough one too. So yeah, like they had to fight Amberlin, Me Without You, Reliant K, PO. Like that's some the heavyweights there. And so
No doubt about that. I'm a huge Me Without You fan. They're a Philly band. I'm right outside Philadelphia, like 15 minutes away. So I'm pretty much in a suburb of Philly. So and also they're weird as hell, right? They're just a weird.
they
I've seen them in person a couple of times. They're just a weird band to watch.
Yeah.
But I'm not surprised that Switchfoot won. I mean, they're just much higher appeal. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
Um,
I agree.
Tim, I'm assuming you didn't know this since you hadn't been aware that the tournament was going on, but Under Oath was losing to Skillet,
Jeez.
and Mason put out a tweet telling everybody to vote for Under Oath, and Under Oath ends up winning 60-40, like
Thank
it
you.
changed in like the last 2 hours.
God bless Mason.
I
That's
thought
doing
about
the Lord's
parodying
work.
that for
That's
Jars of Clay
doing
and
the
DC
Lord's
Talk.
work. Oh my
I
God.
thought about like taking that post that Mason made and just changing it to being about Jars of Clay as just like a reference, like not a genuine, like totally kidding,
Right.
but like making reference to Mason doing that.
Skillet Under
Um,
Oath is literally the deconstruction is evil matchup as well, right? Because you have
Right.
John Cooper from Skillet, right? We all know, and then you have Under Oath. So it's like there's like another layer to us, to people like me, who I'm like,
Yeah.
John Cooper cannot win, Mr. Wage War on Deconstruction.
Might have to try next year to
So
get it to
funny.
where there's a good chance that Under Oath and Skillet meet later on. And
I love
if
it.
that was like a Final Four matchup, can you even imagine how
Oh,
intense people would
bro,
be
I
about
be
that?
posting on Instagram to my 100,000 followers, like whatever it takes, we must
Yeah.
win. Under Oath must win. I'm like paying people. I'll pay you money. Just vote. Whatever. I'm rigging the election.
That's funny.
I'm
Um,
dying.
all right, let's see. In the 10s and 20s, NF beat Toby Mac. Are you familiar with NF at all, Tim?
No, who the heck is NF? I'm like, who? I'm like, is it Newfound Glory? Like, what does NF stand for? I
he
I had no idea.
he has the most monthly listeners of anybody in this whole bracket. He has
I'm old. It's official. I'm old.
17 million monthly listeners.
Jeez
Um,
Louise.
yeah, he's a rapper who has had some mainstream success, but he started in the Christian industry, won Dove Awards, and was nominated between 2015 and 2017. I think he started to kind of distance himself from that. But
3.4 million followers on Instagram. Jeez Louise.
yeah, he's got a massive fan base. Um, but yeah, a lot of people, since he's a newer, I guess, artist, a lot of people aren't really familiar with exactly how huge he is. And I didn't really listen to him much until last year when he was performing much better than I expected in the tournament. And I've honestly become a fan. I really like his stuff.
Really? And
Yeah.
and this dude's Christian, you said? Like he's in that
Well,
space?
he was nominated for Dove Awards between 2015 and 2017. And I think his recent album, they didn't have distributed to like Christian charts and things. So I think he's trying to distance himself from that. But he
Oh,
was definitely part
maybe
of that
he's
scene.
deconstructing. Hmm.
Maybe
I'll
he's
send him a
he,
message.
one thing I love about him is he raps a lot about mental health, and
Oh, I love that.
yeah, he has OCD, which I've been diagnosed with too.
Mm,
So I
mm.
find a lot of relatability in his stuff, but a lot of people think he's just corny. So I don't know. If you listen to him, I'd love to know what you think.
Yeah, I'll throw him on at the gym tomorrow or something,
Yeah,
and then I'll
yeah.
throw him right off. Just kidding.
Yeah, let me know. AJ, what I can't remember. Are you an NF fan at all?
So not really, but I did both in my personal one and the one that I thought would be the result have him coming out of that his area. I had in the my expectation one it being NF versus Toby Mac, and my preference one I had it NF and Sleeping at Last. This is the corner, the region, whatever that I am the least familiar with, and so I think I text you like my rules, like the first 5 songs or whatever on
Yeah,
Spotify. If I don't know a band, I will give them a shot up to their first 5 songs and just like comparing
right.
first 5 songs. I had him coming out of there for preference. And then like I said, because I know how popular he is, I was like, there's no way. Like none of the matchups that I saw, I thought maybe Need to Breathe, and they did come close, but I was like, INF's got that portion of it. And then with Toby Mac, it's Toby Mac. Like, I mean, I'll kind of make
Kind of shocked.
fun of him a little bit, but like I also have to give credit to, the work he did with DC Talk, obviously, but then his like label and the bands that he's brought along and that sort of stuff.
Totally.
Like I think that credit is there a bit, regardless of what I think of his post DC Talk music.
Right.
Credit is due there. And again, popularity, like I understand that he's popular. It may not be my preference of style of music, which again, Sleeping at Last out of this area was for me. But like credit due, right? Like to Toby Mac. And I've told Eric this before, but I don't think I've actually shared this on here. I have Eric in my phone as Eric Mack, like combined like that, to where even my wife knows me. I text her earlier when Eric text asked if I can come on. I was like, Eric Mack needs me on his podcast.
That's funny.
And so I've got him in my phone as Eric Mack, like Toby Mack. But
that.
like I said, this was the region that I had just the least familiarity. Like obviously I knew Toby Mack, and I knew of NF and Lauren Daigle relatively recently, and Lecrae and Owl City and Tori Kelly, like off of the one hit that she had when she first came out. But like I couldn't have even told you. I was like, I think I know that name.
Yeah.
So this one was like actually like I kind of went in new eyes, I guess new ears, which is and there was just some things that I wasn't shocked about absolute destructions that occurred, especially in that first round.
Yeah.
But yeah, I this makes sense as the matchup coming out of there and that result. Because again, I think the generational pool of NF does not surprise me.
Mhm.
Are either of you musicians?
I'm not.
Previously, I played in like terrible punk bands, and occasionally I mess around and stuff. But no,
Totally fair.
not a real musician.
I bring it up because one thing about Toby, and this is for, I mean, even for bands like Newsboys, I would say as well. One thing that really goes underestimated with groups that have that kind of longevity is their ability to move and evolve and like change their sound over time and do it really well. It's not easy to go from DC Talk's early stuff to Jesus Freak to Supernatural to Extreme Days to Diverse City, whatever Toby's doing. Like he's almost kind of like the Tom DeLonge,
Excellent
where it's
reference,
like
yes.
that dude can just write Angels and Airwaves music, Boxcar Racer, like that dude can just write music, right? And sometimes folks like them get a bad rep as being like cheesy or like maybe even outdated. But same thing with Newsboys. Am I a fan of Newsboys now? No. Like God's Not Dead is a cheesy song, but think about where they started and how the band is still together. Yeah, they've had some major changes, but they're still like part. It's still part Newsboys. So I think that people who I'm not saying this to your discredit, but people who aren't like in the musician world take for granted the ability to move between genres and create new sounds. And these guys are doing things. I mean, they're making these sounds, they're making the tones, they're making the arrangements, they're developing the lyrics. Toby produces, he mixes, he engineers all this stuff. And then he goes out and performs it with a band. And that's a whole different thing because Toby's style of music does not translate well if you just play the record to a live audience. You have to find ways to actually connect and translate the energy that only the studio can give to a live audience. So that might mean a slightly different drumming arrangement or doing something different with the chord progression on this part because it hits better. So there's just like so much going on with people like Switchfoot. It's the same thing. They're another band, been around for so long. It takes so much talent and nonstop creativity to put out stuff that is still you, but unique and still catchy and finds kind of banger after banger. It's just really impressive to me. Even if I think on a technical level, these guys aren't like the most technical players of all time. There's a reason why these bands are still around, and a lot of bands that I love who are super technical are not, right? Because it's a different kind of audience that has much more longevity.
Right.
No, 100%. Like that's kind of what I meant by that. Like it just his music isn't necessarily my style of music, but like credit due to his longevity, to his originality, to again like the band development, like his role in like the next generation and giving bands an opportunity and producing their music and like capturing new sounds, I think. Like so I have to give credit due, even though I'm like, yeah, respect to you. I'm gonna hit skip on a lot of your tunes, right? Like,
yeah,
but
totally,
respect.
totally. Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
interesting. I had started, last couple of years thinking, man, I don't think DC Talk's music is aging too well, and Toby Mac along with that. But I've been playing a lot of these artists for my kids. Love DC Talk. My kids have gone to sleep with "Love Is a Verb" on repeat the last 3 or 4
classic.
nights. So it's
Boom!
like, how can I say something isn't aging well if kids who hearing the music for the first time still love it? I mean, that was kind of what they were doing, I think, at the time, was trying to reach younger people, but they also put enough weird stuff in there to keep it interesting for
That's the
adults.
Kevin Max influence right there. Yeah,
Yeah.
Totally. Can I
Yeah.
mention one more thing too that maybe some folks might overlook that
Sure.
it's important to recognize? The studio musicians behind some of these iconic albums, right? People don't realize the level of skill it takes to walk into a studio, read a chart, and then bust out the drum track to Jesus Freak or Supernatural or So Help Me God or the guitar riff like that. Those people are the unsung heroes of your Avalons, of your Point of Graces, your Four Hymns, any vocal led group that had no band behind it. It's these studio musicians, and people don't understand. Like you don't practice with them. What happens is a producer will give you probably what's called a scratch track. It's like a real rough version of the song. They'll give you a chart, and then you essentially have about 2 takes to hop in there, knock it out of the park, and give the producer a workable take to then fit with everything else. It's crazy impressive. So also
Yeah.
another behind the scenes thing that people just tend to overlook sometimes.
Right. And one of my friends, Daniel, who messages me on Twitter a lot, one of his uh, reasons that you should not vote for DC Talk and things like this is because of the massive amount of people who were involved in making it beyond. Like he has a screenshot of everybody who played on the Jesus Freak album, and he'll comment that as his defense for not voting for DC Talk. But yeah,
It's a
that's
fair critique. I can't argue
Yeah.
with it. It really is.
Yeah, but yeah, and the musicians they had were top notch
Nashville,
people.
man, the Nashville
Yeah.
sessions. And this is before digital. This is before, people having their own studios in their basement or having GarageBand or Logic or Pro Tools accessible to you. So you're literally with a band and the band's being paid good money. They have one day to bust out an album. I mean, it was just a different world back then. It's impressive.
Right. All right, I guess we'll move on to predictions for the Final Four. We got Rich Mullins and DC Talk. Speaking of DC Talk, AJ, do you have a prediction there?
Going with my original one, Rich Mullins.
All right.
What?
Again, like the selectorate on Twitter seems really to be a much more pro-Rich crowd than I think if you were to randomly pluck from the general population, even within the microcosm of like CCM folks.
I think it's going to be close.
Yeah.
We'll see about that.
Yeah. I mean, maybe I'm wrong.
I'm about to rig an election, boys. Watch and learn.
There's very vocal people that are really strongly Rich Mullins in this kind of crowd. Eric, I mean, I'm not crazy here, right?
No, last year
Rich came down to Rich versus Five Iron Frenzy
in the Final Four, and Five Iron Frenzy won by 40 votes, and the poll had like almost 10,000 votes in it.
10,000?
Yeah, it was crazy. Shane Claiborne tweeted out.
Shane.
Yeah, he tweeted out vote for Rich, and
of course he would. He would. I'm gonna text him after this and be like, "Don't you dare for this one! Don't you dare!" Okay, it's DC Talks time to shine.
Yeah, so it was Rich Mullins. He actually ended up trending on Twitter during that time too, and I don't know where all the Five Iron Frenzy fans were coming from, but they had over 5,000 people vote for him, and
wow,
they've got some intense fan groups who will do anything to, put their band in the spotlight. So I got a lot of respect for them for sure.
Yeah, good for them.
I'm gonna say this now: if DC Talk does win it, Eric, I want to roll with the DC Talk tournament I've proposed before.
Okay.
Where you take the solo bands, the solo performances of DC Talk, and then also like the fourth quadrant or whatever is the like like them with Tate with Newsboys and Kevin Max with Audio Adrenaline, and like
that's cool.
The times that they all cross over with each other on stuff, and like that's the fourth one. But you do Kevin Max versus Toby Mac versus Tate versus like I have no idea what to call that, the conglomeration of them. So if DC Talk wins, I want to roll we roll with that tournament. How about that?
Yeah, I like it. I like it. So Switchfoot and NF, I am going to guess you all think Switchfoot will win. Is that right, AJ and Tim?
Yeah.
Yeah. My prediction is DC Talk versus Switchfoot.
Okay. And who do you think wins there?
I honestly think it is very close. My hope is that DC Talk takes it, but I would not be surprised if Switchfoot comes away with it. I mean, John Foreman is like a legend at this point. You know,
Yeah.
he's just like memorialized in all of our heads as this beautiful person who writes great music, who loves all people. So it's like,
Yeah.
I can't argue with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Rich Mullins, DC Talk, Switchfoot, those three winning it, I'd be like, yeah, all right. NF winning it, but it might be the one I go, huh.
Yeah. But it's
Like not a
funny.
knock, just not
It's
a knock.
funny
It
because
just- it
he's
would be
really the
dark
most
horse.
popular. It's funny because he's
Right,
really
but-
the most popular artist in it, and everybody's
But
like,
again, I'm thinking about the selectorate here, like the
No, I
folks
know.
that are
No, I
voting
get it.
on Twitter, like that. I do think NF may be the most popular in the real world, but considering the
Right.
pool that we're pulling from, he's the dark horse here, and it's
I
not even
would
necessarily
agree.
a bad thing. It's just
Right.
I think of those four that would be the most like out of left field.
I agree.
But yeah, I absolutely think to the point about like Switchfoot and like John Foreman just being like this incredible person. But I think that's some of the Rich Mullins thing too, is
Yeah.
like you
Yeah.
hear Rich Mullins' story and you're like, so
Right.
like wow,
Vote.
you did what? Yeah, like huh? That's right.
Why even vote? Just crown him and let's move on.
Exactly,
you know?
right? Like it's incredible. And so like then if it becomes like Rich Mullins versus Switchfoot, it's like awesome human beings versus awesome human beings. Like heck yeah, considering like how bleak the world can be at times, you're like, hey, being a decent human being still gets people digging you. All right.
Yeah, 100%.
The
Yeah.
thing that could be a game changer is if Switchfoot decides to tweet about it, because I don't see NF doing that. Rich Mullins obviously can't rest in peace, and DC Talk's official account does not have all that many followers. I guess since they broke up way before X/Twitter was invented. But last year, Switchfoot came on the day after the tournament finished and they lost in the championship to 5 Iron Frenzy. It was like, oh, sorry guys, we missed this. So where they probably could have turned it in their favor if one day before they had seen it. So if they happen to notice it and want to put it out there, then that could change things.
That would be amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
I don't.
If that's the case, I'm gonna have Kevin Max retweet.
I was gonna
DC
joke
Talk.
about that. Like the most online of the three of DC Talk is Kevin Max. Like, can we get him involved in this?
He knows about it. He has commented on the DC Talk Jars of Clay match that he, I guess, disagreed with somebody's opinion on. So he knows it's going on, but a lot of people don't actually want to be associated with CCM. So he might be in that place. I don't know. MXPX was there last year. They knew what was going on and just never bothered to actually put it out there. So I mean, that's fine. You gotta, brand your band how you think they should be, I guess. But
I don't know. Kevin was just on Mason's podcast, wasn't
he? Yeah, that's true.
Promoting his new album.
Yeah,
that's a similar.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I don't know.
to an
Maybe he will. I don't know. It's always funner when the bands get involved. So especially
right?
as
Like,
like,
I mean, that's why when
yeah.
Steve Curtis Chapman got knocked out, I was like, oh, he actually like gets involved in this, like regardless of like the matchup. Like, him versus DC talking about choose DC Talk, but like again, like DC human being having fun with it.
Totally.
Yeah,
Totally.
I love how into it he is. All right, I guess we'll wrap it up.
Wait.
Yes.
I have a request for future two bands to add on to future, more like tooth and nail brackets whenever you do that.
I actually did one last year.
But we can do. You did. And,
we can do another one.
Wasn't on there.
We can do.
I think you had my Epic on there right last year.
No, because my Epic were not on tooth and nail until last week.
I'm a huge my Epic fan.
I am too.
Also, I'm not sure if this is a tooth and nail band, but they kind of were in this space. Ever heard of the band called The Wedding?
Yeah.
Bro. The Wedding. Now that's a deep cut. If you know The Wedding, you really were in the world. You know what I'm saying? You were in evangelicalism.
If Kylan was on here, he would be so excited to hear you say that because his podcast, Church Jams Now, they love The Wedding. They just did a special wedding episode where they counted down each of them's top 10 favorite wedding songs.
Dude, they were one of those bands that should have blown up. Like literally their music is good. Their but Polarity, that album top to bottom, it's produced well, it's unique, it rips, it's aggressive, and it just didn't happen for them. And maybe there was band stuff. Who knows what the reason why? But they were always a band for me that I was like, man, these guys were great. They should have had it. They should have been bigger than I mean, like Falling Up, for example, right? Look, real talk. I appreciate Falling Up. They're cool. Their music is choppy. It's like it doesn't really flow for me. Like they're cool, but I think and I saw them on tour with The Wedding. It was The Wedding and Falling Up on one of these, like, I'm in a white van tours playing like any place I can play. And I saw them both. They were both great. I think The Wedding out of those bands should have been the one on top in terms of popularity.
Those are fighting words to you, Eric.
AJ knows where I'm going here. Falling Up are my favorite band.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I take it back. I love Falling Up.
Have you heard their
fan.
stuff after they were on Tooth and Nail?
I probably have not.
Okay, they totally different band than they were.
What was the songs I listened to by them? Huh? Not I look it up. They were just like, they weren't bad. They were just, I don't know what the word is. Like they were choppy. I don't know. It's hard to describe.
Their earlier stuff was more nu metal influenced, but they basically became like an atmospheric progressive rock band.
Crashing.
Yeah, that was their first album. You wouldn't know it was the same band if you listened to like their self-titled album that came out in 2015.
So they kind of pulled a Cutlass.
Yeah.
Ever heard Cutlass early stuff? They're screaming. I saw Cutlass on tour with Supertones and MXPX. The bass player had flames carved out in his head. They were like a heavy band. And now they're on, K-Love doing all the pop stuff. So you would just never know.
Yeah, well, they were buddies with Cutlass. Cutlass got them signed to Tooth and Nail. But I highly recommend Falling Up's later stuff. They are my favorite band, and it's not because of their early stuff. So if that tells you anything.
I did not mean to offend.
It's okay.
Sorry.
No, it's
at least you didn't go after May.
Good.
At least you didn't say anything about May.
That's true.
But,
I'm a big fan of May. The Everglow, classic.
Yes.
Classic.
Yes. Which, I mean, I'm going to sneak this in as a joke. It's a travesty that May is on this, Eric.
Yeah.
The fact that you didn't put your favorite band in like the best position to like strategically get them in the final. Like, come on.
Yeah.
Your tournament. Like, put the weight on the scales a little bit.
I'm kidding. I don't want to critique the creator here, but there's no Mute Math. There's no Earthsuit, PAX 217. Now, listen, I know there's a lot of bands here. I'm sure you get a lot of recommendations, but there are some doozies. I mean, I'm not sure if maybe you think about like a bracket of like the Left Behind ones or something, bands that like were really deep cuts that if you know it, you're like, oh my God, I have not heard of that band in so long, but I love their stuff. That could be a lot of fun.
I'm laughing because I suggested something similar to Eric.
Yeah, a lot of people have.
I was like, what about like Joy Electric and Copeland and Love Drug and all these weird indie bands?
God is speaking.
Yeah,
confirmation.
I would need a pretty specific like topic or like
totally.
It could be there's all kinds of medium popularity bands that people could say should have been in it. So I'll have to figure out something. But yeah.
Well, you do a great job with these for what it's worth. I honestly really look forward to them. Especially on Twitter, which is such a disaster for so many reasons. It is so enjoyable to be like, oh, me and John Root agree on this, or like people that I am usually arguing with. And then in your threads, it's like we all shake hands, and say, it's all cool here, right? This is the safe zone, so we can vote.
That's exactly what I'm trying to do. Some people do not want that zone to exist, but I'm trying to keep things about the music because there's not a lot that people can agree on, but you can find commonality in a band that maybe will at least humanize the other side.
It's a good reminder, honestly, this is true. Whenever I go to like these Turning Point events, like I was at one last year, 14,000 people. Okay, mostly very much Turning Point, Charlie Kirk fans, and Election Was Stolen, whatever. Man, then you forget, like, oh right, these are human beings. Like they have kids. We both like watching The Office. We know inside jokes about evangelical culture. We're laughing over dinner over things that have nothing to do with the politics or what brings us here, right? And so you're right. Like there are these moments in life where you are reminded, like, right, the person on the other side of the screen is not just like a Christian nationalist or a progressive robot that's like living and breathing this all day. They get off the screen and they feed their kids and they do bath time and they listen to The Wedding or they hate Falling Up, right? Like, this all happens, and these moments kind of humanize that, which I think is so important.
Yeah.
How many times are people going to say this to you, Eric? Like, this was just a thread on Twitter. I've texted Eric this. I think other people have of like, dude, thank you for creating like or helping lead at the very least and organizing a very pleasant space in the dumpster fire that is Twitter, because like I'll like only exist in this space for a few days and then like stick my neck out in another space and get my head chopped off. I'm like, oh yeah, sorry. Forgot. The rest of
We
Twitter
hate
is a
you
dumpster
here.
fire. Yeah, exactly. Like even though again it's like this, it's a subculture, subgenre of things that we have in common.
Yeah.
Like, oh, whoops, I forgot. Over here, we don't do that. It's only in
Right.
this space that it's like, hey,
And the reason that works
paper
is
route?
because people who are involved in CCM Twitter and see all that kind of know that that's what this place is. It's not the place to argue politics. I mean, like if you don't want people to vote for Skillet, that's fine, or vice versa. But there's not
Right.
name calling and things like that. Like there are.
No.
Yeah. So yeah, it's cool to see, and everybody has their own missions. That's not saying everybody should just be happy-go-lucky, get along about everything all the time. But I kind of feel like my calling is a peaceful place to just unite around music and to try and provide that. But
Are you a 9 on the Enneagram? Is that what you are?
I have no clue. I have no clue. I've never done the Enneagram. I always liked the other tests and just never got into the Enneagram.
Like Strength Finders or something like that. Have you done that one?
That's a good one. I did like the Myers-Briggs.
Okay.
Yeah. I've tested for INFJ and INTJ both at different times.
Well, whenever you want to dive into progressive witchcraft called the Enneagram, let me know. I'll hook you up with it,
See,
so
I am a 9, and the only reason I know that is I recently did it because Ronnie Martin mentioned it in the podcast I was listening to of him being a 2 or 4 or whatever. And I was like, what is this? What? I looked it up and I was like, I'm gonna take this thing. Yeah, it turned out shocking.
I love it.
All right. Well, I really appreciate you guys coming on, and we'll I'd like to do it again sometime.
I'm in. So much fun.
Awesome.
Have a good night.
Thank you guys. Have a good night.